Evening, everyone. I'm Michelle DiMarzo, the Curator of Education and Academic Engagement here at the Fairfield University Art Museum. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's talk by Dr. Shirley Mueller, which has been kindly co-sponsored by the Arts Institute and the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences. Just before this, Dr. Mueller and her family joined us up in the Bellarmine Hall Galleries for a little private tour of the show that we have going on there right now, which is called Ink and Time, European Prints from the Wetmore Collection, which I curated along with some of my students. All of the artworks on view in that show originated in the collection of a rather mysterious woman named Fanny S. Wetmore, about whom very little is known, who later donated that collection to Connecticut College. That was what spurred our invitation to Dr. Mueller to speak this evening, since she is a specialist in the neurobiology and psychology of collecting behavior. In the case of our exhibition, we have almost no information about Fanny Wetmore from which to infer her motivations for collecting prints by Durer and Rembrandt and Canaletto, but Dr. Mueller's work has demonstrated that similar principles tend to be generally applicable to all collectors, as we will hear this evening. Shirley Mueller is an internationally known collector and scholar of Chinese export porcelain. She's also a physician who is board certified in neurology and psychiatry. In 2017, she was the guest curator for the exhibition Elegance from the East, New Insights into Old Porcelain at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, which is now called Newfields, in which she combined Chinese export porcelain with concepts from neuroscience to make historical objects personally relevant to visitors. Ultimately, she combined her training and her passions into a study of what drives collectors like herself, culminating in the 2019 book, Inside the Head of a Collector, Neuropsychological Forces at Play. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shirley Mueller.
Thank you, Michelle. First of all, let me say how lucky you are here to have Michelle. I think her skills at speaking and imparting information are very masterful. And as I told some of her colleagues, I've already suggested that we need a curator like her at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. But she said, I'm solidly Connecticut. So apparently she's not interested in the offer. At any rate, how many people here tonight are collectors? Just raise your hand. Oh, that's wonderful. I always love people who have the same bug that I do. We are going to start tonight not with my book, but with someone you probably already are very familiar with. This is Ryan. And he's very skilled, obviously. Isabel Gartner, and I'm sure you all know her museum in Boston. It's very near. Probably all of you have been there. Now, when you look at Isabel and you think of Fanny, you think they're very different people, and indeed they are. But they're both collectors, and that's the important part. Under this hat is a brain, Isabel's brain. Under Fanny's hat, when she wore one, is a brain that is very similar to Isabel. You know, what I found just writing about this subject for so many years is that all collectors share so many traits. For example, someone who collects bottle caps is just as passionate as somebody who collects art paintings that cost $1 million. They both love what they do. Collecting is so much more than just a hobby. It's a relief from everyday life. It's something we can control and something we can show our friends and we can gain friends with from other places, not just our own local area, but other towns, other cities, and so on. And it essentially becomes more than even an avocation, it's a passion. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to do a little history first. This is Sigmund Freud. I'm sure you can all tell Sigmund here. At any rate, Sigmund's dates are 1856 to 1939. And he wrote a great deal about collectors. He collected not only Chinese pottery, but also Egyptian vases and even other antiquities. And in spite of this, Sigmund said, collecting is a redirection of surplus libido onto an inanimate object. Now, what collector here wants to stand up and tell me about that and their personal experience? Probably not many. I knew for one thing that I felt like it was not me. I felt the collecting was much different for me. A more recent writer, who's well respected, is Münsterberger, and he wrote his book in 1994. He lived on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. He had many psychoanalytic patients, and he deducted from those that collected that collecting, their behavior was either from being deprived in childhood or being depraved in some way. And this is what he said: they like to pose, to make a spectacle of their possessions, and while they use their objects for inner security and other applause, their deep inner function is to screen off self-doubt and unassimilated memories. Again, not very flattering. In the 1990s and early 2000s, we made a lot of scientific discoveries. And since I was a neurologist, they interested me. Part of the scientific discoveries had to do with how our brain works. So it seemed to me that this was a good time to approach collecting from a more scientific basis than Freud or Münsterberger. It is true Münsterberger was a psychoanalyst, but he died really before all of this new science began. And in fact, he wrote his book in 1994, before the new science was really available. So this led to my book, Inside the Head of a Collector, Neuropsychological Forces at Play, that Michelle mentioned. It is meant really to take us through collecting, but also through life's choices. In other words, even if you're not a collector, you have to make choices in life, just like collectors do. You know, life is this choice, that choice, and we always want to, sometimes we want to go back and wish we made another choice. But these choices that collectors make are just like everyone has to make. One of the things that collecting brings to us is not only pleasure, showing on the left-hand side of the screen, but pain. Now, this is a food dog teapot. You see the spout is on the left, the handle's on the right. It's about 1740. It's Fami Rose, and it is considered a special teapot. But during I always get mixed up whether we have tornadoes or hurricanes, but we have one of the two in Indiana, and we had one of the two, and the mate to this fell off the shelf. And you see parts of the mate on the right-hand side. So at that moment, there was pain, significant pain. It takes a while to get over this, just as it takes a while to get over any sort of pain. So we're going to look at the collector's decision-making process, and we're going to look at two parts of it. And what we're going to try to do is, by understanding this process, improve collector decisions, our decisions, and minimize the poor decisions. So by understanding ourselves, we can do a better job with our collecting and even with life. So on the left-hand side, we're going to look at neuroeconomics, and we're going to look at behavioral economics. Neuroeconomics has to do with the workings of the brain to make decisions, and behavioral economics has to do with behavioral studies and social studies as to how we make decisions. The third part of the book is, in fact, I probably should go back a bit. We are going over the book, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, Collector Experiences. What's it like to be a collector, and how does it impact us? I think I'm going to, all right, pleasure. We're going to talk about that first. So picture this. I was with a group, the Peabody-Essex group, of whom I've been a member for a long time, and we were taking a trip from Amsterdam to Haarlem, which is west of Amsterdam. And you see here Amsterdam by a blue marker on the right and Haarlem indicated on the left. When traveling between the two, I'm not sure this pointer is working. I was very excited. It does work? Okay. I was very excited because we were going to a medieval city. And so I knew that there could very well be some porcelain there because Haarlem had imported from China into Holland during the 16th, 17th century. So what a treat for me. However, the group that I was with, the Peabody-Essex, had other plans for me. We went to the France Halls Museum, and we spent about an hour there. As you all know, it's a beautiful museum with paintings primarily by Frans Hals, and this shows one of the paintings. And below it, a table set to mimic the table in the painting. But after an hour and a half or so, I realized that I had this itch to go and find something, i.e. Chinese porcelain, of course. And so I went out of the museum, I took a left, another left, and then a right. I stopped at two antique shops. Neither of them had anything. I was devastated. Finally, I stopped at a third shop. And this is the proprietor of that shop. And he had, a few things from 19th century, not terribly important. But we started talking. He had a photographer in back, and they were being photographed. And he said to me, and he turned directly to me and said to me, "It seems like you know something about Chinese porcelain." And I said, "Well, yes, I do know something." He said, "Would you like to see my private collection?" Now, think of this. This was some years ago. And of course I'd like to see his private collection. But I didn't really know if I should see his private collection. So I said, "Where is it?" And he said, "Upstairs." These are exactly like the stairs. So we ascend the stairs because, in the population today, about 37% of people are risk takers. They'll go for it. And I think among collectors, when you think you're going to find something that fits into your collection, it's not that you want it, you need it, then you have to take a risk. What are you going to do? So I walked up those stairs, and at the top was a lovely, lovely cabinet. And in the cabinet, there were some pieces that I had never seen before. Now, this is a risk to me, to buy something I've never seen before. Why would I do that? Well, there were a couple of things. One is the price was not so high that I couldn't afford it, and I could even lose that money if I had to. I didn't want to lose it, but I could. The fact that I had never seen them before might mean that they were very, very rare, and that they would be a real perk to have in my collection. So I'm going to tell you what happened with this in mind a little later. But at the present, I'm going to tell you what Daniel Kahneman said. And this is probably my situation when I'm standing there deciding to go upstairs. Humans are to thinking as cats are to swimming. We can do it when we have to, but we'd much prefer not to. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later, about the parts of our brain. And here you see 3 parts of the brain primarily. So we see at the top of the brain the neocortex, in the middle of the brain the limbic brain or emotional brain, and at the bottom of the brain the reptilian brain, essentially the dinosaur brain. So over the years, our brains have developed from reptilian to a limbic brain plus reptilian to neocortex. In the reptilian brain, our blood pressure, heart rate are controlled and other important functions. In the limbic brain, we have our emotions, that if we want something, that's the part of the brain that tells us we want it. It's the neocortex that is a rational brain and that will decide, depending upon the influences from the limbic brain and the frontal part of the brain, what we should do, the frontal part being right here. It's very interesting that we used to think in terms of making stock trades, that we were cold and rational, that people could actually figure out how to make money rationally. It doesn't happen. We're all influenced by emotion. So the 3 parts of the brain, to enumerate again, we're going to talk just about the limbic system, which is the middle part of the brain. It's deep in the brain under the neocortex. But the pleasure center, the insula, price concerns, and the amygdala, fear center. So these parts of the brain are all interacting when we see something we want. Trying to imagine what someone here would want. Someone here would want Michelle to give the next lecture, maybe. So anyway, what would that entail? It might cost the university some money, price concerns, and there also might be fear that, gosh, maybe Michelle, well, this is risky for me to say, but maybe she would have other plans and actually couldn't give the lecture. So then the frontal lobe of the neocortex would take all this into consideration, decide what the university should do in terms of Michelle giving the lecture. Part 2 of the book refers to neuroeconomics, the biological workings in our brain when we make a decision. And we know this because of functional magnetic resonance imaging. In fact, just magnetic resonance imaging, I'm sure most of you have been exposed to this, not the functional part, but the MRI part, because you've gotten an MRI of your brain, your sinuses, your cervical spine, your lumbar spine, whatever. So it's commonly done today. It's very routine. Functional magnetic resonance imaging is different. With functional magnetic resonance imaging, if someone sees a flower, there is activity in the brain associated with the flower. In this case, it would be the visual cortex. And here you see a little yellow uptake too in the memory area, which is in front of the visual cortex. I'm just going to walk over to it. So the visual area is up above, the memory area is below. Sorry. And it's a flower that precipitates this activity in the brain. I didn't know I'd have a young man running after me. This is a good way to do it. Thank you. So the reason this happens with functional magnetic resonance imaging is because it has strong magnets that can measure moment-to-moment activity of active neurons in the brain. So you see on the left, thank you. You see on the left, this is a blood vessel, and you see that the hemoglobin, which carries oxygen, is in the blood vessel, and you see here the resting oxygen that is responsive to the blood vessel. And here you see the activation of these neurons. When more oxygen is required, more hemoglobin and other nutrients are carried. So the blood vessels actually dilate, and that is sensed by the functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. So let's look at what happens. The nucleus accumbens, you see here in red, and many people have a nucleus accumbens that is stimulated when they see chocolate cake. Many, many people automatically want a slice. Also, when we make a decision, not only do we want something, let's say a new dress, but we have to be concerned about the price. And if the price is too high, it's the insula, which you see the stimulation of that area in the brain in yellow here. Another concern for collectors is it real? Is it authentic? It's a real problem. I think that Fannie Wetmore did not have to worry about that as much as we do today, nor did Isabella Gardner, because today 50% of the art that we see at least is fake. It'll be a reproduction of some sort. So it's so hard to tell. I have to give Fannie Wetmore just so much credit for just charging ahead, and fulfilling her mission, which was to collect in a certain area and probably, I assume, learn as much as she could. It's the executive brain, as I said, that brings all of these items into consideration and decides what the decision will be, whether the person will buy this object or not, whether the person will get married to this other person or not, whatever. Essentially weighing positive and negatives. This demonstrates this in a teeter-totter manner where desire is the nucleus accumbens, price concerns, insula, fear, amygdala, other. So this is a modern executive brain that decides depending upon how these factors weigh. So we see here there's no battle at all when someone has a desire, but there's nothing negative associated with it. Then they can go and buy whatever they want or act however they want because there isn't any opposing factor. Incidentally, I'm just discussing the most important negative emotions that we know more about. There are hundreds of emotions that come into play every time we make a decision. And eventually, I think we will know more about many of them than we do today. Another possibility is that we have a desire, but price concerns are too great, or there's a fear of deception that's too great. One of the people that I have followed in terms of collecting is Eli Lilly, who is from Indianapolis, Eli Lilly Pharmaceuticals. He's now dead. But I have all of his papers, and Eli Lilly is just so remarkable. He sometimes makes decisions that saved him. He didn't even know it was happening, but he made a decision not to buy something because maybe the dealer pushed him a little too hard, and he thought, there's something odd here. So I have to be laudatory toward him. Acting as a businessman and collecting kind of worked synergistically for him. Behavioral economics, making choices based on psychology and social science. We're going to cover 3 of them. One is anchoring, and I'm quite sure all of you are familiar with this. Anchoring is when you fixate on a target, and the target may or may not be accurate. So, if we saw a garment that we wanted for $300, and we saw that it had been slashed from $1,000 to $300, we'd be much more likely to buy it than if we just saw the $300 independently. This demonstrates, I think, the concept perfectly. This was research done by several researchers, and it looked at Campbell soup cans. And when there was a discounted price for the Campbell soup cans in the grocery store, on a limit of 12 per customer, on average, the customers bought 7 cans each. Now, in the next trial, same grocery store, there was the same discounted price, but there was no limit. And an average of 3.3 cans per shopper was sold, indicating the anchoring effect. Whatever we have in our mind is what plays a very important part in what we do. I'd like to talk about a personal experience here with a Japanese Amari vessel that a dealer offered to me, and I was very taken with it. And this is his invoice on the right. And you see that his earlier price was $3,500, but he would give it to me for $3,200. And of course that made it so much more attractive to me. This is anchoring. Now, wait, there's more. So, my husband and I go to the Espirito Santos Foundation in Lisbon, and some of you may have been there. And I saw on a table a Japanese Amari cruet set, which is a set of 5 generally, and it's for oils and vinegar and that kind of thing. And it is There, you see the arrow? There it is, and this is what it looked like close up. And you see that the vessel on the left looks very much like the one he was offering me. So then I realized that I wasn't buying like a special little teapot. I had purchased part of a cruet set, which should have been worth much less. So at any rate, I don't even think the dealer knew. So both the dealer probably was not uninformed, and I was uninformed as well. So this is the way the process of collecting goes. As though, those of you who collect, you know that it takes years and years to learn enough to really be the best collector. Unfairness. Oh my goodness. If we perceive that a dealer or someone else is treating us unfairly, we do not feel good about it. This is demonstrated by the fact that when we buy, we want to pay a fair price, and when we sell, we want to glean a fair price for the object. So how do we determine this? Well, it's called the ultimatum game. And you see here, upper right-hand side, there's money to share. There are two players. The player who has the money has to give player B enough money so that person will accept what A offers B, or the game is over and neither of them get any money. So if A offers B less than 25% of the money, B rejects it because it seems unfair. But if A offers B 30% or more, generally, B will accept it because it seems a little bit fair. They both know what kind of money it is, how much it is. So in life, think about you being invited to a dinner party 8 times, but you never reciprocate. I'm thinking probably the other person thinks it's unfair and you don't get invited a ninth time. So we live by these rules, the fair and unfair. Not only do we live by these rules, but animals live by these rules. And I'm going to show you capuchin monkeys and what happens when the one capuchin monkey is offered a grape, which they like, and the other one is offered a stone. Oh boy. And they're side by side. And the monkey on the A side, which you'll see on this side, can see that the monkey on the other side got a grape and he didn't. This is pretty powerful. So I'm going to need you.
Getting grape and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
So unfairness means we don't want to deal with another person again, even in the animal kingdom, the capuchins. Sunk cost is very important in terms of our dealing with ourselves in life. And this applies over all categories, not just collecting, but everything we do. And it's I hope one of the most important things that you take away from this lecture is this concept of sunk cost, which is a tendency of people to irrationally follow through on an activity that is not meeting their expectations because of the time and our money they already spent on it. To give an example, you look up in the newspaper, on the internet, a movie that you think will interest you and your family. You drive to the movie, you pay for the movie, you might have to wait in line, you buy your popcorn, you get into the movie. After 15 or 20 minutes, you realize, this is not for me. I made a mistake. What do people do on average? They stay because they've already sunk their time, money, energy into it. Ellen, our daughter, who's right there, saw a movie recently. What was it? The Wolverine movie. And I think she and her husband thought maybe they should leave. So this is a movie that if any of you saw, I think makes the point. Uncut Gems. Adam Sandler. It won a lot of awards, and people, however, who saw it were not enamored by it. So this is a movie that if you were in the theater and went to all this trouble, probably most people, if they didn't like it, would have been better just leaving. So think of other choices in life. A job you stay in too long, a love affair you stay in too long, a friend who doesn't have common interests but you continue with in spite of that forever, instead of making new friends that might have common interests. This is something that we all do. And in collecting, we do it as well. For example, I'm going to show you what happened to me. This is Bidding and Christie's, 2015. And what I really wanted at this sale was this teapot and saucer, the Arms of Pitt, who had been the prime minister in England around 1800. And this would add so much to my collection. At that time, teapots were my focus, Chinese export teapots. So I went to New York from Indianapolis to see the teapot in person. I examined it. I talked with the specialist. And I went to the location we stay in New York City when we're there. I don't bid in person, I bid online. And bidding in this sale was fierce. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to get that teapot because I'm not willing to pay $20,000 or $30,000 for it. I can't pay that. So this is what happened. Remember sunk cost. This is what Shirley Mueller did, and she's not proud. I bid on this set, and I bid on it 4 sets before the pit came up because I knew I was going to lose the pit. But I didn't want to, give up all of that time, money, effort. So I bought this armorial part tea set. Has the arms of Grigby. Nobody's ever heard of Grigby. Nobody wants a Grigby. Nobody cares about a Grigby. Well, if any of you do, I have a Grigby that you can buy. So now we're going to return to part 1, pleasure and pain. And the pain part has to do with the fact that there are so many fakes in the market. It's overwhelming. So I'll just give you an example here. This plate is actually 2 plates photographically put together. So on the left is the authentic, and on the right is the fake. Actually, the fake, I bought it from eBay. I knew it was fake, but I bought it for the demonstration of how the fake tries to emulate the authentic, but is not doing so. So here you see again 1740, the authentic on the left, the early 20th century, 21st century on the right, recently made in China, probably 30 years ago. You see there are differences. So some people say, why would anybody even care? They look similar. Well, this is why they care, because we want essentialism. We want something to be real. In our society today, there are so many things that aren't real. There's so many, with AI, duplications that are trying to make us think that a video we see on TV is Biden, and it really isn't. I don't know if you've seen that video, but it's quite disturbing. But we like essentialism, and the proof of that is that in terms of wine, and there are many other examples of this in many other areas, but if we were doing a wine tasting tonight and the wine were exactly the same that you were being presented with, except in one case you were told that it was a wonderful wine, it rated a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. And in the other case, you were told the wine rated 1 on a scale of 1 to 10. This is what would happen. Your pleasure center would light up, as you see here on the left, the green is the pleasure center, when you thought the wine was good. On the right, even though the wine was the same, your pleasure center wouldn't light up. So if we transfer this to art, this kind of concept, art is not what you see, it's what you think you see. We all see something different, obviously. Going back to pleasure again. So you remember my trip to Harlem, and I want to remind you that we have the emotional brain, the limbic system, the middle brain, and some scientists think that 95% of our decisions are controlled by our emotional brain. Certainly, a large part of our decisions are controlled by our emotion, and we don't recognize it. Climbed that stairs, and this is what I saw, this beautiful cabinet. It was like, going into a Dutch home of the 17th century. Everything was neat as a pin. And this purveyor had the most beautiful, to me, as I said before, what I later learned were tea caddies, but he had these objects. I don't think he knew what they were, and I didn't know what they were. So this is a situation where neither of us knew what we were talking about specifically, but it turned out happy for me. And he sold them to me for what was a reasonable price, I thought. He said, quote, and you hear this a lot, "I'd rather sell it to you than another dealer, because you're a collector." And at any rate, they went to Indianapolis. They sat on shelves, just like you see on the right-hand side here. We had a cat called Ernie. I heard my husband talking about Ernie with someone earlier. Ernie loved porcelain. I mean, it's like he knew he lived in a porcelain home. So he could actually walk among the porcelain on these shelves. And it's hard to explain, but his tail, he was very delicate with his tail. And he would just sniff, and then he jumped down again. He was very careful. That is, until one day when I received something in the mail that indicated to me that what I had, and didn't know I had, was, as you see here, right here in her left hand, one of these pieces. Well, Ernie wasn't going to jump on that shelf anymore. Those pieces were placed in a different area of the house where he couldn't get to them, because I realized then that since this piece was in a royal palace, that I might have something worthy of royalty. In actuality, in the world, there are only 5 sets like I have, and they're all in royal collections. So they were special. It's not because I'm so smart, it's just because I took a chance and it turned out. So how do we know that they're special? Well, because here you see the tea leaves that are upside down on the caddies, and so these are actually tea caddies. I didn't know that when I bought them, and the dealer didn't know it either. But you see for the caps, one is white on blue and one is blue on white. One was for black tea and one was for green tea. In this particular engraving, which segues with Fanny Wetmore's collection, we see in 1700 that a piece that could be exactly like a tea caddy was in this engraving. We don't know that for sure, but it's a reasonable supposition. Oops. So I want to show you a little bit more about the tea caddies. The one I just showed you is in the Oranienburg Palace, which is northwest of Berlin, about 50 miles. When you are in Berlin, you can go to it on a train. It is a wonderful palace, the Oranienburg Palace, and seeing that ceiling is a real treat. I think you'd all enjoy it, plus the other porcelain in the palace. Again, a picture of the ceiling of the palace. During World War II, there was significant bombing in the area of the Oranienburg Palace. And this is because, for 2 reasons. There was a prisoner of war camp nearby, and ammunitions were made nearby. The most remarkable thing is that this ceiling survived. Just, so fortunate. And here again, we see the transitional tea caddies. I have 2. So what all this indicates in terms of our processes when we think about making decisions is that our pleasure center is stimulated. We as humans always want pleasure, or we should, or we're depressed if we're not wanting pleasure. So we seek pleasure, and part of that is collecting, which fulfills a specific niche in life. It could be akin to loving ballet or baseball or football or whatever. There's so many different areas in this first world country that we can develop interests in. Our collecting decisions involve a struggle, and all decisions, between our emotions and logic. And by understanding this, we can not only increase pleasure and diminish pain, but we can also make better decisions in general. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. In case there are questions.
If anyone has any questions for Dr. Mueller, throw your hand up. I will bring you the microphone. I'll start, because one of the questions I was wondering until I saw that fresco, how large are the tea caddies that you have? Are they as large relative to the human hand as what we saw in the painting?
They're about this tall.
They're big.
And this wide. They're bigger than my hand.
Fascinating.
Now, that is consistent. That is consistent with them belonging to royalty, because in 1640 or so, tea was very expensive in Europe. And so anyone who owned these large tea caddies would have to be wealthy.
My second question is, what would you say to Sigmund Freud if you could speak to him today?
That's such a good question. I am trying to think about what I would say. I think I'd say we have to talk about this, and I don't think I'd win an argument with him because I think it would be very hard. But I think if he were able to see the scientific studies that are modern, that he would be persuaded in spite of that.
That is a fair answer.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to hear what you have to say about the brain and to see the brain imaging. In the arts, we do things often that people think can't be measured or maybe shouldn't be measured. And so in brain study, which happens, they're newer things that are explained every single day, it's wonderful to see a study or a life of collecting as part of the arts that goes into the literature about the brain that can be measured.
There are so many things that can be measured and are being measured. Actually, physiologic studies in museums, like breath rate, heart rate, or skin response, galvanic skin response, to tell if someone is interested or not. And these studies indicate what excites visitors to museums. So I talked about this once with a director and asked him if, based upon what could be found in these studies, if he would call out CULL, some art, so that what visitors liked he would be showing and less of what they didn't like. He said, no, that's not the point of the art museum. And point in case, think of Lucian Freud. Not everybody likes Lucian Freud, but he grows on you, so to speak. So this really happened in the Met. There was a board meeting, and it was Philippe de Montebello then, who was director, and Brooke Astor was on the board. So this was, I think, 84, when Philippe de Montebello presented a painting by Lucian Freud, as usual, you know, a huge person with a lot of extra fat hanging over. And he had to get the okay from the board to buy it. It was quite expensive. And he presented it to the board, and there was a long silence. In this particular painting, however, the person wasn't facing us. He was facing the other wall, so it was behind that was shown. No one said anything. Finally, Brooke Astor said, well, at least I'm glad that he's turned the other direction. So that broke the ice. And I personally love Lucian Freud because the ugly is just as beautiful as the pretty, I think. But you have to get used to it. Agreed. You know, I think a lot of you can think of maybe paintings you like that others don't like, but we all have our own personal reasons. I think it's actually development of us as a society if we can learn to like the ugly, but I could be wrong.
Did the jars have any residual tea at the bottom?
That is a great question. These particular jars didn't, which means they probably weren't used, but I did a study of teapots are you interested in lead and tea in the 18th century? Well, there's lead in teapots in the 18th century, and would have been probably lead if these had been laced with tea, because there were so many opportunities for lead in terms of coming over in lead encased chests, tea caddies that were lead lined. So while people thought that tea was medicinal, they also probably were adding another poison. So, you know, I guess I can say that it was at least not germs that was killing them.
And did the form ever become vernacular?
Tell me, do you mean like that caddy, or what do you mean?
In other words, here you have a rectangular tea caddy, of course made out of ceramic, not metal, not wood, not glass. At what point would the material indicate that it is indeed instead vernacular and not, say, royal?
Oh, okay.
Do you think it would be silver or precious metal or glass or some form of material that was destroyed?
Right. So the tea caddies that were used by the general population first were much smaller and oblong, not the larger caddies that we saw here. That's a very good question. And then the tea caddy evolved over time from oblong to circular, like this. But it was never what I would call the royal shape.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mueller. Please join me in thanking tonight's speaker for joining us.